Hello out there. Welcome to our second webinar from Frog Month Victoria. My name is Justine and I work for the Corangamite Catchment Management Authority, and I am the State Water Watch and Estuary Watch Facilitator. I'm just going to share my presentation with you. The data is in. I work at the Corangamite Catchment Management Authority, and we work on the lands, waters and seas of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation, the Kirawurrung, Jagudwurrung, Gulidjan and Gadabanud people of the Maar Nation, and I acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So you might be wondering why I am running this webinar, me, Justine. Well, Frog Month Victoria has been a pilot project between Water Watch and Estuary Watch, the University of Melbourne and Melbourne Water, to test the waters of a state frog monitoring program to try and better inform catchment management authorities in their decision making. Tonight, we are looking at the data from last October, or Frogtober. We'll be hearing from Professor Kirsten Paris from University of Melbourne. She's coming to us from Geneva tonight because she's on her sabbatical, so thank you very much, Kirsten. She's also been reviewing the data and she's writing a report about the data, which will be released to the CMAs and the public later this month. I'll also put a chat in the link as well, so you can sign up to the mailing list, and if you'd like that report in your inbox, I can send it to you too. She's also going to talk us through the autumn frogs that will start calling soon and how we can start monitoring them. We're also going to hear from Jane Petch from Melbourne Water. I can see some people can't see the presentation, but I'll keep going. I think it's going all right for some. So we're also going to hear from Jane Petch from Melbourne Water. She runs the frog program out of Melbourne Water, which is called Frog Census, and she manages the Frog Census app. And this is the app that we've been using for the project. If you're new to using the Frog Census app, please stay on the line because Jane will walk you through how to use the app once all the presentations are finished. But we're also going to have a fantastic volunteer, Rob Heller, who's going to also tell us about his month of monitoring last year. Thank you, Rob. I just want to remind you that you've probably already noticed your cameras and mics have been turned off. This helps the webinar to run smoothly, but we definitely still want to hear from you. If you can put your questions in the chat box, and I'll do my best to ask Kirsten and Jane at the end of the session. So I am flying solo here to run the webinar. And I don't know if this is foolish, but I'm going to try and run a poll now because I'm really curious to hear about your preferences for the timing for these webinars. And I want to know if you prefer afternoons or nighttime. So let's see if I can launch this poll. Can you see that poll? Kirsten, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Okay, great. Oh, that's interesting. I see many people. Oh, no, it's changing. If you can't see the poll, do you want to type your answer into the chat and I'll make sure I add that to our results? And I can see some people are saying, oh, there's no slides either. Kirsten or Rob, can you confirm that you can see the slides? You can? Oh, Rob can't. Kirsten can.
Okay.
All right. All right. I think we'll...
because the data is in.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. All right, I'll leave the poll there. So what I'm going to do now, I am going to hand over to Jane, who is going to talk about a few of the stats from Frog Month Victoria October. So I'll hand over to you, Jane.
Thanks, Justine, and hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. So I'm going to provide you with a few riveting frog statistics, and I promise that's the end of the bad puns from me. I'm going to give you a bit of a general overview of the data that we received in October. And then we're going to hear from Rob, and following from Rob, Kirsten will give us the details of the data and her analysis, which we're all sitting on the edge of our seat waiting to hear about. So I will just share some slides with you. And I should let you know as well that I'm coming to you tonight from Wurundjeri country. And the first, hopefully it's not too late in the evening to be looking at bar graphs, but this one is not the one that I was expected, but that's the data from 2024. So you can see the significant peak in figures for October. So during October this year, we got roughly 5 times the amount of frog records that we normally receive throughout the month. But what you'll probably also notice is that there are key reporting months as well for frogs. So April, August, October and November are the key months that we encourage people to go out and collect frog records. And that's because most species are likely to be calling in those months. So we're likely to capture all the species that are found in your location. So there was another slide that I had which showed a comparison of Octobers over the last 5 years or so. And what that showed was that this October just gone, so Frogtober as we're calling it, we had almost a 50% increase in calls or reports from you, which is fabulous. And it's really important to receive as much data as we can, because the more data we have, the more statistically significant it becomes. So basically that means that we can better understand what's going on with frog populations if we have more data. Okay, let's move along to the next slide. So just a little bit of a breakdown about who was recording. So we had 298 keen froggers during October who sent through recordings. And there was about 21 people who sent 6 reports during the month. So that's quite impressive. And our Frogtober champion made 23 reports during October. So that's almost 1 report each day, which is pretty impressive. And that's, you know, really a champion effort, and we really appreciate that. Next slide. A few interesting facts about the data. About half of the reports that we received had multiple frog species calling. So once we split those out, it came to over 1,200 different reports of about 10 different species that were captured in your recordings. So some of these reports were sent through had no frogs calling, and that is still important data to capture as well. So we call that a null report. So if there's a location that you regularly visit and hear frogs, and then you turn up and don't hear frogs, so it's great if you can still submit that report, and you can select no frogs calling as you complete your report. Just move along to the next slide. If I can. So I guess you're all dying to know which frogs were reported. So I guess it's an easy guess that the common eastern froglet was the most recorded species of frog, and that was followed closely by the eastern banjo frog. And both of these species can be described as generalists. And I did a little bit of a comparison as well between the data that's collected statewide and what we normally see in Melbourne as well. So the eastern banjo frog, also known as the pobblebonk, probably many of you are quite familiar with this species, is found across most of Victoria and is quite commonly dug up in the garden. So they are very good at sheltering in the, burying themselves in the soil and sheltering during drier periods. The eastern common froglet also occurs throughout most of Victoria, and they can breed in any available water, and they're quite tolerant of habitat disturbance, so very much a generalist species, and they call almost all of the year, and they breed from late winter into late spring, so generalist species. So I compared, as I say, the data that we collected across the whole state with what we normally see in Melbourne. And again, the most common species in Melbourne is the eastern common froglet, but the second most common species was the southern brown tree frog, then followed by the spotted marsh frog, and then finally the eastern banjo in fourth place. So I guess this is a reflection of the urban environment, and southern brown tree frogs definitely seem to adapt well to an urban garden environment. So just a little bit of an interesting comparison. Now I'm going to hand over to Rob, who's going to talk about his experience using the Frog Census app during Frogtober. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Jane. Just as a bit of background, I live in a place called Reservoir, which is in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, and I live on the banks of the Merri Creek. And I'm in one council area, and across the other side of the creek is another council area. Now, the Merri Creek starts at about 28 miles north of Melbourne, and through the suburbs it goes through was a heavy industrial area in the past. And so basically it was like the industrial drain for a lot of manufacturing over many decades. And to the point to the 1970s, it was just a polluted mess. And the people that lived along the banks actually got together in community groups to actually try and do something about it. And joining with council from about the late 70s, they created the Merri Creek Coordinating Committee and started to actually do things about the creek. So you can imagine that a lot of species of different sorts of animals, and certainly frogs, just did not survive, or they left that area. Now, I'm near what's called the Moomba Park wetland, which was officially opened in May last year. And it was an initiative by the Merri-Beck Council, and it was developed to create a water filter system for the stormwater that was collected over about 8 hectares in that area. And it's got 3 separate ponds. The water goes through, takes about 2 days to get through these ponds. And at the end, it should have, the water quality should be good enough to sustain frogs, and so that they can, have a decent habitat and breed. So also at the wetlands, they put in walking tracks for people to go to, and some educational material like signs to put up to explain what's going on. So before the wetlands opened, I'd actually been on a little tour, a frog tour in another part of the creek that was co-run by council. And so I learned a bit about the frogs in the area, and also to use the Frog Census app. So then I got the app onto my phone. So I thought, when I go down to the wetlands, I can start doing my recordings. That can be my bit. So I was going down there most days, and I'd see how the wetland changed over the couple of seasons. The vegetation was taking on. at least one of the ponds is actually still fenced off to keep predatory animals out, which is great. And the vegetation certainly has really come on in the last 12 months. It's a magnificent place. So I'd go down, and as Jane said, the most common species was the common eastern, and I'd hear them quite often. And occasionally I would hear others. And the more I did it, the more I got familiar with the sounds of the different frogs. So over time, I must say that I was able to capture recordings of about 6 to 7 different species. And that was pretty exciting. So I'd get down there probably around dawn, a little bit after dawn, do my recordings. I'd take a photo. I talk to the frogs, as you do, as you should. I hope we all do, and the birds, etc. Well, one particular day, it was January last year. I heard for the growling grass frog for the first time down there, which was very, very exciting because here's a species that was endangered. And now, because of the creation of this wetlands, not only was it only able to come back, but by being able to use the Frog Sensors app, I was able to actually record that and share that with everybody. Well, I know that when I started doing this, the people at work thought I was nuts going down to record frogs just after dawn, but they could see the excitement in my face when I was telling them how excited I was to actually capture the voice, the chorus of the growling grass frog. So I've enjoyed the experience so very much, and I take my hat off to the council and all the people that have been involved in making those wetlands, because it's working. It's terrific. Unfortunately, at one point, some person had actually introduced some European carp into the wetlands. The council were onto it very quickly and have fished it out. So it's all I can say from that too is it's been a pleasure to be involved with this. The app's fantastic. I know a couple of other people that have been able to download the app, and they've been able. And one of my friends, Liz, who I'll say hello to, she's actually been able to record a frog that actually lives, or a couple of frogs that actually live now in her backyard. So it's very, very exciting.
Thank you, Rob. That must have been super exciting to hear a growling grass frog. That's, yeah.
Oh, I think I actually got tears.
Oh,
Yes.
I can understand that. It's so
Yeah,
special.
yeah. No, it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
Thank you so
real
much.
privilege.
Thank you for
Thank you.
presenting, and it's really great to hear from you from a volunteer, a very passionate volunteer perspective. Thank you.
I love it. Thanks very much.
Well, I'm now going to hand over to Professor Kirsten Paris from the University of Melbourne, and she is going to talk us through the data, the nitty-gritty of the data. So if you're there, Kirsten, I'll hand you the reins.
Yes, thank you, Justine. Thanks, everyone. And so lovely to hear from Rob about his experience at Moomba Park. That is in my broad neighbourhood, and I was very keen to get up there as well to listen for growlers and other frogs, because I did survey there before the wetland was built, and it's really exciting to see that development. So I'm here to report back on Frog Month Spring, and towards the end of my little presentation, I will also get people enthused about the upcoming Frog Month, and that is Frog Month Autumn. Okie doke. So in Frogtober 2024, you heard from Jane that there were approximately 1,200 records submitted, which is amazing and a big jump on previous months. So taking the Melbourne Frog Census program out to the whole of Victoria and to engage people with nature in their neighbourhood in every catchment management authority region was a really great success, even from the beginning. But also I feel like it's from now on, we can build on that for every Frog Month that comes along. So there were 11 species detected from the recordings, plus one photo was sent in of an additional species. 12 altogether. And you may remember we had 2 feature species for the month. And that is the sound of Latoria ewingi. And that's that cute little frog we've got there. So the southern brown tree frog, the common frog in the city that Jane mentioned. All right, here's a breakdown of data. I did see in the chat a couple of people were keen to see a bit more info. This is a pie chart, colours for each species showing the breakdown of those, the 11 species across the records. And the common eastern froglet and banjo frog or pobblebonk were really common. And then we had just tiny little slivers of some species that are only detected between 1 and 5 times. Here's a map showing the distribution of the records across the whole of Victoria. And each species is colour coded, and depending on the size of your screen, you may or may not be able to really connect the colours of the dots in the legend with what you can see on the map, but I will be zooming in shortly to take a look at each CMA region. So this shows us the broad distribution of the data and quite a concentration around the Melbourne region, but we had at least one record from each location in terms of a catchment management area. So this was our first feature species, growling grass frog, which we've just heard about. Oh, okay, people are now not seeing my slides. Ooh. Is that better?
See your slides, Kirsten.
You can. Just check in. All right. Did others see the first view, or do I need to go back?
I think most of us can see it, Kirsten. I think there's just a few who's having problems with the Teams app.
Okay, great. So our second feature species is was Latoria phalanx, the eastern dwarf tree frog, and unlike growling grass frog, this species is very common to our north in Queensland and northern New South Wales, and it's an introduced species here in Victoria. So we were keen to track where that species was appearing. And if the introduced populations were expanding. So looking in on those 2 species in particular, here's the map of Victoria again with Latoria rhiniformis, the growling grass frog, in the bright green dots and Latoria phalanx in the purple. And we can see here that the growling grass frog was detected across the Melbourne water region and the Corangamite CMA, and we had 36 records altogether. And for Latoria phalanx, as we knew before, there are some populations around Melbourne, and then there are some that are living in northeastern Victoria, which is really interesting because that's a place that gets very cold during the winter. And you might think that it's not really suitable for a subtropical species that's come down from the north, but seems to be going along okay. All right, let's focus in on each CMA region now, and I'm hoping that we have representatives of every CMA in the webinar today. So if you're from the Mallee, give us a shout out. There were a few species detected there, and up around the Hattakulkai National Park, and then one down in the southern area of the Mallee. The Wimmera, we had one record, yay for Wimmera, just south of Stawell, and it was possibly in October not great frogging conditions in our drier, warmer parts. Hey, we've got someone from NCCMA. But I feel that for the autumn and then for Frog Month Spring next year, let's see if we can get our Western Victorian friends engaging more strongly with Frog Month. Again, just one little record down here from Glenelg Hopkins near Warrnambool. Corangamite CMA, where Justine is based. Yay, Corangamite! Put in some really interesting records, and there's a wide diversity of species, including growling grass frog. Woohoo! Go team Corangamite. Sorry about that. North Central CMA, some nice representatives here as well, particularly in the eastern part of the CMA region, and quite a few species found. I do have a table at the end that shows how many species were found in each CMA region as well for comparison. All right, here's Melbourne, and perhaps not surprisingly, because Melbourne has a strong history of engaged frog folk who have previously been using the frog census app in spring just for the Melbourne region. We had a really great response there. More records than previous Octobers, as Jane has mentioned. So we've really seen that base has expanded and more people have been engaging with the frogs in their neighbourhood around the Greater Melbourne region. Goulburn Broken, a nice scattering of records here from up towards the Murray, and then all around pretty much the outskirts of the Goulburn Broken catchment management area. Northeast did very well, and as I mentioned earlier, there was the Latoria phalanx, the introduced eastern dwarf tree frog, was found up there near Albury, and previously there have been reports of the species around Yakandanda, so it is a little bit of a stronghold for it. West Gippsland, quite a few species detected there, and being one of our wetter parts of Victoria, as is East Gippsland, we know that there are a lot of frogs living there. So it would be really great to expand our frogger base there in the coming autumn, because there's some really interesting autumn breeding frogs all through the north, east, eastern and southern parts of Victoria. And we'll see who we can find in autumn. So here is a little table showing the number of frog species detected in each of the CMA regions for Frog Month Spring. And Melbourne and Corangamite and Goulburn Broken and Northeast are all doing pretty well across those regions. And yes, as pointed out a moment ago, the number of records and the number of species detected will depend a lot on the population. And so that is why we see, as well as having a lot of frog enthusiasts, we just have more people in the Melbourne, Geelong, large urban and regional centres of Victoria. But that doesn't mean to say that those of us who live in the city can't have a little holiday to the Mallee or to East Gippsland to go looking for frogs. So let's see what we can do about covering off those gaps. Justine, would you like me to take questions now on spring, or just finish off for autumn?
We could try that. I've got where are you? Vesna, I'm going to see if I can take you off mute to see if you can ask your question. So if you hit your unmute button, do you want to try and ask the question, Vesna? Okay, I'm going to unmute you as well, Alex. I'll just see if I can unmute you. And then you'll have to, now you can unmute yourself, Alex, and ask the question if you're able to.
Oh, sorry, my hand was raised as being someone from the area that was mentioned at the time.
Oh, well, tell us where you're from, Alex.
Oh, the Corangamite.
And did you lodge any calls last year?
I think so. Not necessarily in October, though.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll mute myself again.
Okay. And was that the same for you, Vesna? Do you want to have another go at trying to unmute yourself? Okay, I think we can probably continue, Kirsten. But I did see that there's a really interesting comment in the chat from Christian. It says data is going to be skewed more towards big population centres, which you spoke about, which is to be expected, and community outreach programs would be helpful. Frog diversity would be higher in less populated regions, which is so true. And we do have citizen science staff in most of the CMAs, and they do work with me on this project. So they will be getting the reports from this project, and we'll be working together to figure out how we can get more community outreach in their regions. I'll throw back to you, Kirsten.
Thanks, Justine. So I assume if you've come along, you are a frog enthusiast, or at least frog curious, and there's now another opportunity for you to participate in this program, and that's coming up for this month of April, Frog Month Victoria Autumn, and we have a different colour scheme for autumn, yellow rather than green. Pretty nifty. All right, Frog Curious. Thanks, Phil. So we're having just one focus or feature species for the upcoming month of Frog Month, April, which is the Bibron's toadlet, Pseudophrony bibroni. And this species is a really interesting one. I seem to have lost my slides.
Oh, that was me, Kirsten. I couldn't see them. I'll just, do you want to try and take control again? I'll just shift you along. Okay, sorry.
That's right.
I threw you right off. Okay, yep, I can see them.
I'm just whizzing through. Whee, there we go.
Great. Yeah.
Sorry if that gave anybody a bit of a dizzy spell.
Oh,
right.
Sorry about that. Yep.
Bibron's toadlet, Pseudophrony or Pseudophrony bibroni. It's called a toadlet because it's small and bumpy. It's not a toad or related to a toad. It's just that common names don't seem to be necessarily very my jet lag's just hit and I can't think of the word I'm looking for. Imaginative. So there was a tendency to call anything lumpy a toad and anything small and lumpy a toadlet. So that's where this common name comes from. Like a few other species that are active in autumn, this species of frog has a really interesting breeding life history. Rather than laying eggs directly into water, the female frogs lay their eggs in terrestrial nests. So in damp places, under leaf litter and logs, the male frogs will call from there and the females will come and lay their eggs in the nest. And the first part of the tadpole's development takes place within the egg in the nest. And once some heavier rain comes, it will wash the eggs into a little ephemeral stream or a water body, and that's where the tadpoles complete their development. So it lays eggs in nests or burrows, and the species used to be quite common but appears to have declined quite substantially across Victoria. So we're interested in it for a few reasons. One, because it's super cute. One, because it seems to have declined and is now considered endangered in Victoria. But thirdly, because there are very few recent survey data on the species, so we don't have a good sense of where it is and where it's persisting across Victoria. And I'll see if I can play its little sound. Roughly how big? pretty small, 2 to 3 centimeters, maybe a little bit bigger for the females. Yes, but small, and you're unlikely to see them, but we're hoping that you'll hear them and be able to record them. Another common species, well, another species that's an autumn breeder, but in this case, one that's still very common across Victoria, is the southern froglet, sometimes called the Victorian smooth froglet, and that's Geocrinia victoriana. And similar to the Pseudophrine species, it also lays its eggs in terrestrial nests, and it's still common across much of eastern and southern Victoria. And it has a really distinctive call, so you'll know if this one is about. So the call has two parts. It's got the first bit that goes and then the pip, 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 pip. So pretty amazing. They're two species that we're hoping to get some records of for this coming frog month, autumn in April. But as for frog month spring, we're really keen to get records on any frogs you hear calling, any species anywhere in the state. And even if you visit a water body and there are no frogs calling, that is also, as Jane mentioned earlier, a useful data point for us. Question about what's on the Frog Census app. I might send that one to Jane, but my final pitch for April is that it's a nice time to be outdoors generally once the weather gets a bit cooler, and hopefully we'll have some rain soon, which will encourage the frogs to start calling. And you will also hear a bunch of the species that were active in spring may pop up again for another go at breeding. So the pobblebonks, the other marsh frogs, the common eastern froglet may be heard again during April. So there's still a lot out there for the frog enthusiasts. So thank you, Jane and Justine.
Thanks, Kirsten. I'm going to have a go at reading these questions. Jane, did you see that question from Leon? Hi, Leon. So he says he understands that Melbourne Water collects eDNA on frogs. And how do the species found, do you mean found in Frog Watch compare with Melbourne Water Monitoring? The frog census compared with the Melbourne Water Monitoring? Do you know about that project, Jane?
So the main way that we collect data on frogs is through the Frog Census app. So we have done a few smaller projects using eDNA, but the data from eDNA is sometimes not as useful because we can't specifically locate exactly where the species might be occurring, and we don't know exactly how many frogs are calling or located in that where we've collected that sample from. So, and there is some doubts about the ability to necessarily be able to clearly identify that a frog is occurring in that area, and we're still doing some testing with eDNA. So the frog census is the predominant way in which we collect data on frogs. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
There's also another question from Lisa. So she wasn't sure if it was the Frog Census app, but she's got a question around if you don't have mobile phone coverage, can you still use the app?
So you can go out and record. So if you're in a location where there isn't any coverage, you can still make your recording and it will be stored on your phone. And you will see that if you go into the reports section of the app. And then what you can do is once you get back to a location where you have Wi-Fi coverage, say you get back home, you can then upload that report at a later date. So it's just important to make sure that you've collected your location data and completed your report before you leave the site where you've made the recording, so that we get an accurate idea of where the recording was made, if that makes sense. But yes, you can definitely still record even if you don't have any mobile data.
There's also a message, another one for you, Jane. And this is also related. I'm interested to know if and how people are able to photograph the frogs in the app. And what if your backyard frogs are outside but not calling? What's the best way to monitor for you, Jane, in this app?
Yeah, so there is a facility to take up to 3 photos within the app, and that's in the second step of the loading your report. So photos can be useful, but sometimes they're not sufficient information for us to be able to identify the species. So ideally, we would need a photo from a number of different angles, depending on what species you're photographing, just to get a definitive identity of that frog. But I understand that it may be a female frog and it may never call. So you're most welcome to still send in those photos, but we can't guarantee that we can give a definitive ID for those photos, but it's still giving us a record of their occurrence. And, we could get in touch with you if we suspected that it was one of the threatened species. That's for sure.
Danielle from Hawthorne House Organics, you may have just answered the question and I might not have been paying attention, but she's saying, do you want us to guess the type of frog we think it is or just record it? Did you just answer that question?
You're most welcome to guess if you would like. And this can be a bit of a process of education. So you can have a bit of a guess at what you think the frog is calling. But what happens is that all the records that you send to us are verified by ecologists. So they will go through and listen to your recording and they will correct that identification if necessary. So that gives you an opportunity to learn and hopefully get to know the species that are found in your area. So having ecologists listen to all your frog recordings means that we are collecting research grade data, and it takes about 4 weeks at a maximum for the ecologist to go through the calls and identify them. So you can go back into the app about a month later and check on the ID of those recordings. And the other thing is that we share all of the data that is collected with the Atlas of Living Australia and the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas. This means that we are making all the data publicly available to any land managers, researchers and students and so on. So we're contributing, or you are contributing to our greater understanding about biodiversity in Victoria.
Mm. And also, if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed about using the app and thinking, gosh, what species is this frog? There is the option of I don't know. Is that what it's called, or unsure? What's the label on that, Jane?
Yeah, so unknown species. So if you scroll down to the bottom of the selection, there's an option there for unknown species or for no frogs. So you can select either of those as is appropriate. And as I say, the call will be listened to by our ecologists and you will later find out what species that is that you're recording, which is pretty cool.
And this is also another reminder that if you are going out to a wetland or a river and there's no calls, we also want that. That's data for us when you're saying you can't hear any frogs there. So please record that if you're not hearing anything. A question from Demi Rose. So most of her reports do not appear on the map. Does this mean that her calls have not been verified, Jane?
Yeah. No, normally they will appear on the map straight away as soon as you submit the report, but they'll be coloured orange. And once they are verified by the ecologists, then they will turn green. So just check and make sure that you have actually submitted those recordings. That, I think, would be, unless there was, I think, about 6 reports which had we couldn't identify because they were photos, or there's a couple of hybrid species that we couldn't we don't have listed within the app. So if it was one of those, then it wouldn't be recorded. So I think there was only about 6 records in the end that weren't able to be identified. And as I say, most of those because they were photos.
Jane, another couple of questions related to this. So how do you find out later if your frog has been identified? Do you get an email or an SMS? You just have to go into the app and see if it's changed colour. Is that right?
Yeah, so the best way is to go into the app, have a look at, you can go to your reports, or you can go onto the map and have a look that way. We are setting up an automated email system, but that's still in process at the moment. So sometimes you do receive an email, but not guaranteed for every report. But we're working on that.
Okay, great. And this might be a question for both of you. Did the ecologist identify any endangered or unexpected frogs? Kirsten, did you? I'll start with you.
Sure. So the growling grass frog is considered a threatened species, so it's listed under the Federal EPBC Act. And so that was a threatened species that we found, and we had 36 records of that one around the Greater Melbourne region into Corangamite, and some quite healthy populations on the Bellarine Peninsula near Port Arlington. And I think that of the other 11 species detected, they were all common species for this round.
And that's part of the reason, Kirsten, why we're asking people to collect records during April, because there are a couple of endangered species that are autumn breeding frogs. So hopefully we might capture those, some reports of those.
And Jane, Marissa's asking, where again do you find the map to look at the data? Is it just on the app? How do you access that?
Yeah, so if you look at the bottom, I've got some slides which perhaps I couldn't share. Are you ready to do that? We move along a bit.
Yes, you could do, just skip. I was just going to do a
so if you go to
everybody, but skip past that and then I'll go back to it.
Yeah. So if you go to the bottom, come on, move along. If you go, will it show up on that one? Maybe on there. Thought I had a slide which shows.
Basically, that one. This one at the bottom.
At the bottom of, I can't see it because it's too small on my screen, but basically at the bottom of the screen, there are, I think, 4 or 5 options, and one of those is map. So if you select that option, it will show you the state of Victoria and all the records that have been collected. Now, what you can do is you can filter that. So you could filter so that you only see your records, and that's probably the most useful thing to do in this case. And then you'll be able to see whether your records are orange or green. So that will indicate whether or not they've been verified. So that's probably the easiest way to check. So this image here shows you what the map will look like within the app. Now, I don't know whether anyone would like me to just step through a few tips on using the app.
Yeah, I think we should do that, Jane. But what I might do for those who already know how to do the app, I'll just oh, look, there's a few more people saying yes, please. But I'm going to try and am I sharing this now? I was going to do my call to action for everybody. Can you see that final slide that says thank you for attending?
Yes.
So we really want you to get out there and start recording frogs from the 1st of April. and we want you to use the Frog Census app. And we are really thankful for the work that happened last year. It's really incredible, all of the frog calls that have come in, and we want you to go back out there and do the same if you can again. I have just seen one more question, which is interesting, from Derek. Kirsten, we do have time for one more, so don't forget to monitor in April, but here's another question. A question for Professor Paris. Do you have any opinion on the introduction of endangered frogs into areas that are not necessarily part of their indigenous ranges or into modified engineered waterways and habitats?
Whoa, it's a big question from Derek. Generally speaking, the introduction of any frog anywhere is a very strictly controlled process and must go through many levels of approval. I know that for some species, it's being considered as a last-ditch conservation measure where their existing habitat is likely to be severely impacted or disappear altogether under climate change. So there are thoughts taking place on whether in the future it might be necessary to move populations of some threatened species because they can't access, or in the future won't be able to access suitable habitat. That's something that's, I know there's an example of that, not for a frog, but for the Western swamp tortoise, which is a critically endangered species from Western Australia. And there have been moves to make specific conservation translocations of that species further south in WA because Perth is getting so hot and dry that it's likely that the species would go extinct if it was left there. I don't think any of our Victorian species of frogs are in that boat yet. It might happen in the future. In terms of moving things or making new habitats for frogs to move into, which is definitely the preferred approach, even, for example, for the Moomba Park wetland that we heard about earlier from Rob, that was constructed as a wetland on the hope that it would provide suitable habitat for growling grass frog. But the people who built it didn't move the frogs in. They waited for the frogs to come under their own steam. And I think that as long as the habitats that are being created are suitable in the long term for the species and they're not going to create some kind of trap that lures them in, a trap as in an ecological trap, lures them into a place that is suboptimal for their fitness or persistence, then I think that is a reasonable approach. That was a long answer.
No, that's fine. And I can see some people are saying, Marissa, she was saying, oh, I still can't see my data records. And she's just said, oh, I hadn't cleared the date. So now that she's cleared the date, she can see her record. So if you'd like to try and do that, if you're still having the same problems, please do. There's a question about glyphosate. Do we know if frogs are sensitive to glyphosate, Kirsten and Jane? Would you like to have a go at that one, Kirsten?
Sure. So generally speaking, it's best to keep all herbicides and pesticides, insecticides away from water bodies where frogs are living. Glyphosate is, in some cases, is considered a better option than other herbicides, and it depends a little bit on the formulation and what surfactant is used. It gets quite technical, but generally speaking, it's best to avoid using herbicides near water bodies, and also better to prevent runoff from places where pesticides, herbicides, insecticides are used.
Yeah.
I was just going
do you want to add?
Sorry, I was just going to add to your previous response about translocating frogs. So they're a protected species and you're not allowed to capture them or move them. And that includes tadpoles and eggs as well. So many of us who are older may have fond memories of collecting tadpoles in a pond and raising them in a vessel at home, but frogs are now protected and you're not allowed to do that. And it's important not to move them because there is a risk of spreading disease as well. So as Kirsten said, the best option is to build the habitat, create it, and they will come. Local species will inhabit suitable habitat over time.
Thanks, Jane. And so what sort of Indigenous plants should we be propagating for frog habitats from Tatiana?
It depends a little bit on the species, how much plant growth they'd like around the water body. Our growling grass frog, which we seem to have been talking about a lot, is a species that likes to bask in the sun. And so having sunny patches and warmer water is beneficial for that species, and it helps it to throw off any infections from the chytrid fungus, which is a really common disease. But generally speaking, if you can plant some aquatic plants where the plants are in the water, but they don't shade the water, that's a good option. Like triglocken, the water ribbons is a common one, and a lot of species will like that. And just having at least part of the bank of the part of the bank of the pond, having some reeds and sedges and some lower growing plants would be like just a bit of a variety is good, and that will cater for different species.
Thanks, Kirsten.
Yeah, if you're interested, sorry to interrupt, Justine. If you do live in Melbourne and you want to have a look at the Moomba Park wetland in Fawkner, it's a really beautiful example of using locally Indigenous plants to plant a variety around a wetland, and you might get some good ideas there.
Thanks, Kirsten. So what I'll do now, if you want to get the reports from Frog Month Victoria in October, so we're just calling it Frog Month Victoria, and we have October and we also have April. But if you would like to get the report from October, I'm going to put the sign up to the mailing list in the chat. So I'll just pop in the newsletter, sign up. So if you click that link and put your details down, I can send the report to you once it's finalised, which might be probably in the coming month. And what we're going to do now is we're going to end the event for everybody who would like to go on and do something else. But if you want to stay on so Jane can talk you through how to use the app, please do. So a big thank you to Jane for presenting, and Kirsten for presenting from Geneva, and Rob the volunteer, and thank you all of you for coming along. It's been really great to have this interesting discussion and have your data come in. We really, really appreciate it. So what we'll do now is stay on the line if you want to know how to use the Frog Census app. And if you don't want to, that's fine. You can leave the meeting, but we'll stay on for those who are interested. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a lovely evening. I will throw over to you, Jane, now so you can walk through how to use the app.
Thanks, Justine. So I'll just scoot ahead. Oh, a little bit of frog noise. So the app is freely available for all smartphones. So just go to your app store and look for the Frog Census app. And you can download it there. So that's something to do while you're at home before you head out. And the app is really very easy to use, but it does rely on the GPS data from your phone. And I know some people don't like to have their location services turned on. So what you can do is just specifically turn on your location services while you're using the app. So all you need to do that is to go into the settings part of your phone and select the app. And the screen that I've shown here is what it looks like on my phone. So you can just turn on the location services while you're using the app. And in my phone, there was also an option to get accurate data. So that's what I've also turned on in my phone.
Hey, Jane, can I interrupt
Yes.
quickly? Someone wants me
Yes.
to take control and then for you to take it back. So, because that refreshed it for them. Do you mind if I do that?
Yes, sure.
So they can see the screen. And I'll just go zoom ahead a little bit and zoom back. Now, do you want to try and steer it from your end to see if that's worked for
Okay.
this,
All right.
for Janet?
Okay, hopefully you can see the screen now. Okay,
Sorry
so
about
that screen just shows you how to set the GPS location data. Because as I say, that's what we use to then position your call on the map. So it's really important to have that turned on before you get started. Okay, I'm sorry you're not able to see the slides. Okay, so the next one, so the first screen that you come to is the record button, so the big red record button. So once you're hearing the frog's call, you're in position, stand still and just push that and make sure that you've captured all the different sounds that you're hearing. So the recording function goes for 5 minutes, but it's not necessary to record for 5 minutes unless you're doing kind of a strict survey protocol. But you just want to make sure that you've captured all the different species that you can hear. So generally 1 minute is sufficient for that. And then once you've done that, the app just nicely steps you through the process of submitting your record. So the next screen, and what you'll see at the top too, which I find is really helpful, they're just numbered steps. And you, as I say, you just work through those. So if you're not happy with the recording, you can delete it and start again. If you're happy, then you use the next button that's down on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen to then proceed to the next step. So the next step in the process is, so there is an option, as I mentioned before, to take photos. You don't have to take photos, but you can choose to take up to 3 photos. Sometimes if you're out in the dark, there's not going to be any point in taking the photos, but sometimes I find if I'm reporting from a number of different places, sometimes taking the photo helps to remind me where I was recording from, because I might want to go back and record from that location again. So yeah, that's optional whether you want to use the photos or not. So the next step is the really critical one, and that is about your location. So there are 2 options, and I click on the use my current location, and you'll see that then it pops up with a latitude and longitude to define where you are currently standing. Now, it is really nice to do is to then just check that that is correct, because sometimes, for whatever reason, the location information is not exact. So what you can do is once you've use my current location, then go down to select from the map. And that will, as you can see, that right-hand picture will just give you a dropped pin for your location. And if you don't think that that is quite accurate, or you can see that it's a little bit off, you can just drag that drop pin and locate it more accurately. And that's really important kind of information, because if you're out recording in a wetland in an urban area, obviously fine grained location information is really important, because maybe right adjacent to that wetland is a road, and we don't want the record to be in the middle of the road. We would like it to come from the wetland. So that's the reason for just checking on that. So last step then is to describe your location. So it gives you the option to choose the frog species. It doesn't matter if you don't know what frogs are calling. You can just select this unknown frogs at the bottom here. And there's the no frog option there as well. If you want to have a go, there's no penalties for choosing. If you think you've got some idea of which frog it might be calling, you're most well, or if you know you're experienced frogger, you're most welcome to select the option. Now, there might be, because the app has been designed for the Melbourne region, there are 16 frog species. So there are a few frog species that aren't listed within the app. Don't need to worry, because if the species that you record is not listed there, it will still be identified by our ecologists. So don't worry too much about that. So you just got an option here to complete a little bit of detail. It's really good to provide a kind of good description of where you're taking the record. As I say, if you are taking it in a wetland, it's good to let us know the name of the wetland, for example. That just gives us a bit more information about the kinds of habitat where frogs are found. So that's useful. You can have a bit of a guess at how many frogs you think are calling, and you will find with experience that you get better at being able to choose whether it's, between 1 and 3 or more than 10. That comes with time. So in the comments box, you've got an opportunity there to put in a little bit extra detail. So if you did happen to see frogs' eggs, for example, or tadpoles, it's really useful to get that information, because then we know that frogs are actively breeding in that area. And it's also really useful as well just to put a little brief description about the weather, the current weather conditions, because frogs are quite weather dependent, so they won't always call. So that again goes back to our null data. So if you did make a recording where you heard no frogs, and if we've got the weather information there, that just gives us another piece in the jigsaw puzzle. So as I say, as comprehensive as you can make the records without it being arduous, all that information is really useful. So as I was having the discussion earlier, you can see on this screen here that some of my records have not been submitted. So they've got a green tick if they have been successfully submitted, and you'll see that cloud symbol if the record is ready to upload. So that happens in a case where you might be out in the field and there's no internet service, or you've turned your Wi-Fi off. That doesn't matter, because the record is still saved to your phone. So once you go home, as long as you complete the whole record process, once you go home, you can then later submit those records. And it's always good just to go into your reports every now and again and just check and make sure that you have submitted everything, because that may be one of the reasons why you're not seeing your report on the map if you've forgotten to submit it. Just a few little tips. So the weather, as I said, frogs are really sensitive to the weather conditions. So you don't want to be wasting your time going out on a freezing cold, windy night, because you're less likely to hear frogs calling. It's best to go out when the evening temperature is above 12 degrees and it's reasonably still. Ideally, just soon after rain is the best time to hear frogs calling. And again, those key months, April, August, October and November, are the key months that we like you to go out and listen for frogs, because we're most likely to capture all the frog species that are calling in that location if we go out in those months. And about 30 minutes after dusk or sunset is the best time to make your recording. So you want to go to your location and just stand quietly for a little while. That allows the frogs to become accustomed to the fact that you're there, and then begin recording. And a lot of the recordings I find people are walking around. We don't want that. We want you to stand still where you are and just record what you're hearing from that location. Once you finish that recording, you might decide you want to move and go to another location and do another recording. But in terms of the quality of the sound that we're getting, and the accuracy of the report, it's really important for you to stand still and not wander around. And trying to keep you back to the wind or any other noises that you might be experiencing at that site also helps with the quality of the recording as well. And I'm not going to rabbit on because I think it must be dinner time right now. So on this last screen, I've just got some contact information. So if you are having concerns or issues with the app, please send me an email and I can help you personally with that. There's lots of information on the Melbourne Water website. You can either scan that QR code with your phone, which will take you to the website, or you can use that web address there to access lots of information on frogs. But as I say, my email and phone number are there. So if you are having specific issues, I'd be more than happy to help you out with that. And I think that's all for tonight. I'll hand you back to Justine.
Thanks, Jane. That was really good. So thank you to the 9 people who remain. Good luck with your frogging in April. We would like you to start on the 1st of April, and we really look forward to seeing your data coming through. Janet said, where are the contact details? They are your phone numbers there on the...
And
my, your contact is
well
frogs@melbournewater.com.au.
Yes,
What a great email address.
That's right. It's easy to remember. So frogs@melbournewater.com.au. That will reach me and I'll be able to help you out there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jane. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you dialing in at dinner time. And
goodbye, everyone.
We hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for listening in.